It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. I'm the president of Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. You can find my work at emailrevealer.com. We've got a fascinating guest today. We have John Tinker. Mr. Tinker, are you there? Oh, I can't hear you at all.
Not hear me?
Try to speak up a little bit there. Maybe Danny can turn up your audio too.
I'm on a telephone here.
You're on what?
I'm on a landline.
Okay. Hey, Danny, can we try and reconnect that phone call?
I can hear you fine.
Okay. Why would this be? I can't hear him at all. Okay.
Oh, boy.
Well, Mr. Tinker, tell the audience, who is John Tinker?
Who is John Tinker? Well, most people would know me in association with 1969 Supreme Court case, Tinker v. Des Moines. I was 15 years old and sued the Des Moines public school system on a First Amendment ground. I'm getting quite a bit of echo here, and it's making it hard to form coherent sentences.
I can't hear you at all.
Okay. I can hear both of us.
John, before we get into the whole thing about the First Amendment and the Supreme Court case, tell the audience, who is John Tinker today? What do you do?
Well, today I am the station manager for a small community radio station in Fayette, Missouri. It's located right here in our home, which also is the old public school building. So we have an old public school building here, a beautiful 3-story brick building with an antenna on the top, and we've got software that keeps our radio station on the air and a couple of computer networks. I'm a software guy myself, so that keeps me pretty busy. But I'm also developing a website that I've been working on for about 17 years right now. It's an ambitious website. I have news feeds that are automated and cross-referenced to each other. So I've got about 20,000 right now of different, they're basically search arguments that go out into the internet and get news items, and then I run them through a sort of a filter so that I try to keep some of the junk out. But I try to provide a reasonably good index to current news to a global audience. We have 20,000 topics that covers pretty much the whole globe and lots of things within it. So that all keeps me busy. We heat with wood, so I also cut a lot of wood. Really want to know how I spend my day.
Okay, well, I got a couple of questions for you before we get started. How'd you wind up in a schoolhouse?
Well, I always wanted a big building. Now, I tell this story, and sometimes people think I'm kidding a little too much, but when I was a little kid, going to kindergarten, actually, and they took us on a tour of our school building in a little town called Atlantic, Iowa. And I just loved the building. I kind of want. They introduced us to the janitor of the building, and they explained how he was really the most important, person here. I mean, the teachers are important, of course, the students are important, but the janitor, he makes it all work. And so I have a real early love affair with large buildings, and I had some in a small town in Iowa, a different town, but they were all in pretty bad shape. So my sister was a physician here in this small town in Missouri, and she said, "Hey, the public school's for sale. You should come down and look at it." And by coincidence, that happened during a little window of a few years where I actually had a real job, and I was able to afford to buy this building. So I love it to pieces. It's a very, very substantial building. My neighbor, she died a few years ago at 95 years old. She said, yeah, when it was built, it was the best building in town, and I believe it. It's a really nice, solid, beautiful building.
It's the kind of building, if there's a hurricane or something, that's where people would go and
You know, there was a tornado in Joplin a few years back. You may have heard of that. And it was devastating. I mean, it killed a whole bunch of people and just wiped out the town. And one of the guys from the University of Missouri in Columbia, who was sort of an expert on some community phase, or he was an emergency coordinator type of specialty, and he had gone down to Joplin. Well, he happened to be up here in my in what we call our kitchen. It's a classroom, but we use it as a kitchen. And we were having a meeting about solar panels that he was promoting. And he said, well, if there were a tornado here, this is the building you'd want to be in. So
yeah.
I don't want to be in a tornado anyway, but
tornado. Don't have hurricanes on it. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, also, too, you own a radio station. What do you play? What do you put on the show, on the station?
We have a real mix. Actually, I'm a radio engineer. It was one of my previous incarnations from way back. I always wanted to be a ham radio operator, and I studied hard, and I got my ham radio license. I just, on a lark, kind of took my commercial license and became a chief engineer at a small AM station up in Iowa City. But when I saw the window for the FCC filing for the low-power FM licenses back in 2013, I kind of jumped. Well, it was a delayed jump, but they extended the deadline a couple times because of the government shutdown. And anyway, I got an application in, and by golly, we got the license. So we played. I tested the station with some music from an Andean band that I used to play in up in Iowa, and then I tried out some Chris Hedges speeches and climatology speeches and things like that, but kind of upset some of the community. But then we moved into more of a regular schedule, so we play like jazz overnight, then classical, and then in the morning we do local community announcements and so on in the morning, and then we move into Amy Goodman's Democracy Now!
Very nice.
We play a number of syndicated programs that we get from PRX, and we've got automated scripts, that bring them in. So a lot of it runs by itself, but we do have a nice crew of volunteers here, about a half a dozen community people that are very loyal, dedicated to the radio. It really was a surprise to me to see the dedication that volunteers were willing to put in to it. And so they do their own shows. They do different, whatever kind of music they like. And then my wife, she interacts with PRX quite a bit and is always looking for good stuff. So we do like Backstory was one, open source. We have a basic. Well, the basic rule is that we try not to broadcast crap. I mean, we try to have our news stories be reasonably truthful. We carry Deutsche Deutsche Welle, which, could be considered part of the Atlantic Alliance perspective. It's just like on my website, I use a BBC newsfeed, and I'm thinking, do I really want to do that? But anyway, it opens. We do carry, we carry Democracy Now!, so we get that perspective, and then we try to carry a pretty good, basically left, progressive point of view. I don't know. We try not to be political explicitly, but I guess it has to do with our own perspective on what makes sense.
So, is it a commercial station or non-commercial?
No, non-commercial. We're nonprofit.
Gotcha.
We're organized under a 501c3. That we needed one to apply for this license, and it was very fortunate that a local woman here had one already running called International Educational Resources for Rural Missouri. So it was like a perfect fit, really.
So you're most widely known, though, for Tinker versus Des Moines Board of Education, or Des Moines School District, a landmark civil rights Supreme Court case, right? Tell us, how did that come about?
Well, the Vietnam War became more and more intense in 1965. I was 14 years old at the time. My father, at that time in our life, was working for a Quaker organization called the American Friends Service Committee, and his job title was Peace Education Secretary. So his job was to organize symposia and lectures and all kinds of informational events to get people up to speed on international affairs, basically, on war and peace issues. And so we had quite a bit of information about the war in Vietnam that was contrary to the U.S. administration's position. And my parents were lifelong peace activists, and before that, really civil rights activists up in Iowa. My dad actually got asked to leave two different Methodist churches. He was a pastor, a Methodist pastor, a preacher, and because of his civil rights movement activities, he was asked to leave. That happened twice when I was a kid. So then the Quakers invited him to work for them, and that's how he got that job. But anyway, we knew quite a bit about what was going on in Vietnam relative to what the general public knew. And so when the big demonstration, the first big one over the Thanksgiving holiday of 1965 in Washington, D.C., my father organized, or helped organize, a couple of busloads of college students mostly to go to Washington to be part of that big demonstration against the war. And my mother belonged to Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and they were actually part of the coalition of organizations that put these chartered buses together. So I asked if I could go, and my parents agreed that I could go. And so I went to Washington, D.C., and on the way back there was a discussion on us of what we might do to continue to protest against the war, to try to bring awareness to the general public about what was going on with regard to Vietnam. And somebody said that they had heard that there were groups that were going to wear black armbands, which are a traditional symbol of mourning. When somebody dies in your family, you might wear a black armband. So anyway, people thought that was a good idea. I thought it was a good idea. It's non-disruptive. You're not really in anybody's face. You're just wearing that black armband. And so there were four of us, high school students, on those buses. all belonged, coincidentally, to a Unitarian youth group. I, by then, was attending the Quaker meeting, and then after the Quaker meeting, I'd go to the Unitarian church for the youth group, and I was a member of the Unitarian youth group. We decided as a group, kids, to wear the armbands for two reasons. We were mourning the death of everyone on both sides of the conflict, and we were promoting Robert Kennedy's call for a Christmas truce that year. So one of our high school students wrote up an article for his school newspaper explaining what we were doing. When his faculty advisor saw what he'd written, he got on the phone and called the principal and informed him of what was up, that this was coming along. And did he know about it? No, he didn't. And he got on the phone to the other principals and informed them that it was coming up. And they had a meeting, and they decided to not permit the armbands. And so they told the newspaper, and we read about that decision then in the newspaper. So that was 2 days before we were actually planning to wear them. And time passed.
How many kids in total were going to come wearing armbands?
There were going to be about a dozen, but then when, or perhaps a few more, but then when they had the ban was announced, then that dropped to 5. There were only 5. There were a couple of students that wore armbands that didn't have any problems, so they weren't part of the lawsuit. But anyway, we decided to sue in the federal court and worked its way up through the courts, and then we won at the Supreme Court, rather a large 7-2, victory at the Supreme Court. And then over the years, it has been referred to by many other cases, and so it's become the primary First Amendment case for public school students, and actually also for teachers. It's the famous paragraph, one of them from our case, is that it refers to neither students nor teachers shed their First Amendment rights at the schoolhouse gate. So that's how it turned out. It wasn't we were just opposing the war. That was our intention and our motive. But the years passed, and it's become quite a big deal. It's going to have its 50th anniversary of the decision. Will be next February.
Well, let me ask you this. Now, this is 1965, so there wasn't a lot of popular opposition to the war at that time. How was this received by your fellow students? Were they supportive?
It's funny because, like my friends, I grew up during the Civil Rights Movement, and my parents were involved in it. So I went to civil rights demonstrations, and I was called the N-word lover at school. I mean, I was really bullied over that. I kind of grew up with those expectations in a way. I forget where we were going with that.
Were you well received by your classmates?
Yeah. Well, as a result, everyone knew, where I was on civil rights and the war. I didn't hide my opinions, and I was just a kid. But kids have opinions, and they pick up opinions, and they talk about things. So my friends that I already had, they already knew those things about me. So they stayed with me, and some of the kids at school bullied me, really. They harassed me. They called me a coward or a commie, things like that. But most people really just didn't care. That was a real surprising thing to me. It's a lot of, I talk about this to student groups, teacher groups, and so I get asked those questions quite a bit, but the real answer to that, how did people react question, is most of them don't react at all. But anyway, it was a real mix. It was a spectrum from people being proud of me, like I had a history teacher who actually bumped my grade up from a B to an A. He said he knew another teacher had knocked me down a grade over it, so he was compensating. And another teacher invited me to talk to his students several different years. I wore it in 10th grade, so I had 2 more years of school there. And one teacher every year would have me talk to his students about the war in Vietnam. So that was really good.
So you were planning on wearing the armbands, but then they passed a rule saying that you weren't allowed to wear them, but you wore them anyway? Is that what happened?
Yeah. Yep, that's what happened. I got on the phone. We hadn't met again as a group, the students that were going to wear the armbands, after we had heard about the ban on the armbands. And so that morning, about 7:15, I guess, I got on the phone, and my younger sister had already gone to school with an armband. But I got on the phone and suggested that we hold off until we have a chance to meet together, discuss this new circumstance of the principals saying we couldn't do it. But a couple went to school anyway that day and got kicked out, and the rest of them waited. And then we called in the afternoon. We called after school. We called to the school board and tried to talk to the president of the school board to explain that we were not going to be disruptive. We were just going to wear these black pieces of cloth. And he said he didn't care. He didn't want to talk to us even. So at that point, I felt thoroughly justified to go ahead and wear it, and the next day I did. I could tell you a little more of the story, the actual getting kicked out part.
Let's hear that. Yeah.
I'd been wearing the armband all morning over a suit jacket. It was kind of dark. It wasn't black, but nobody really saw the armband, or those that didn't say anything. And my math teacher, I'm pretty sure, saw it, but he just didn't say anything. So I took off my suit jacket after gym class. I just got dressed again with just my white shirt and an armband over it, and it stood out really well. And then I went to the cafeteria for lunch and sat with my friends there. And some kids came over and were kind of harassing me, calling me a commie and this and that. And a football player came up and said, you guys have your opinion about the war. John has his opinion about the war, and John has a right to his opinion, so leave him alone. And I'm thinking, wow, this is a jock, and here he is defending me. And I thought that was pretty cool. And then an office worker saw it. She took the news back to the office, so I was called into the office there. That was quite a conversation. It was a long conversation, and he didn't bully me. He was calm, tried to convince me that I was wrong. He had been a Vietnam or a Korean War veteran, and he said sometimes. Says, maybe I don't understand how during a war it's important to support your country. He said, maybe I've been listening to the wrong people. Maybe I've been listening to some communist propaganda. So on. I mean, he was paternalistic toward me, but he was also kind of respectful. And then at the end he said, now I'm going to ask you to take that off. And if you take it off, you can go back to school, and it'll be just like nothing happened. I said, but I don't think you're going to take it off, are you? So anyway, he kicked me out. He said, well, I'm going to have to send you home. Anyway, it was interesting to me because the level of conflict wasn't really as great as you might think. I don't know. I guess, my principal, he could have, said, no, let's not have the ban back when they had the meeting of the principals. But I think they were embarrassed by us. They felt vulnerable to the community to have any of their students expressing an opinion against the war, because the war propaganda really was such a strong factor, and everybody was being influenced by the administration line because of the limited number of news outlets and so on. It was the whole country was really kind of marching lockstep down this path, and being told that if we don't fight the communists in Vietnam, we'll be fighting them in Oakland, California. It was really hard.
It was a whole other world. It was a whole other world in 1965, and I was born in 1962, and I'm from the Bronx. Yeah, right. But even still, I heard a story you told, I think it was on C-SPAN, where there was only one black family in your neighborhood, and they weren't allowed to swim in the public pool.
Yep.
In 1965.
No, that was in the 50s.
Okay.
That was in a small town in Iowa that my dad was the Methodist minister in that town, and there was one family. And the kids weren't allowed to swim in the swimming pool. And it was like the church youth group found out about that, and they decided to take it up with the city council. And instead of just correcting the problem, the city council got upset by it all, and the people that were in my dad's church said that he was causing conflict and controversy in the community, and they didn't want that, so they asked him to leave. And interestingly, when we got to Des Moines, to his next church, a very similar thing happened. We had invited our black friends. By then, our mother was sad that we were going to know some black kids. We were going to be friends with some black kids. So she made connections. She made friends in the black community, and her friends that had kids became our friends. And so we invited them to go to church with us, and the same kind of thing. They didn't want black people in the church. So they asked our dad to leave again. It just broke his heart. It really did. He thought he was of the Christian school of thought called the social gospel. His thinking was that if you could just get people to understand that we're all part of humanity, then we could make a peaceful world. And that's what he was expecting would happen. But instead he was getting kicked out of church. And so anyway, that's when the Quakers, who have a long history of taking dissident positions, they asked him. They were very happy to have someone who had been involved in the civil rights movement. So at that point, we started attending the Quaker meeting, and that was very enriching to our experience, too.
It's fascinating because, I tell my audience that I'm a socialist, and I'm also a Christian. I'm a born-again Christian. And to some people, it makes their head explode. They just can't get the concept. Like, what? That's impossible. Just watch their head explode. Now, I have a quick question for you. Now, you've been influenced a great deal by your parents, what they've instilled in you, their morals and their beliefs. How about your brothers and sisters? Did any of them lose their path and vote for Trump or anything like that? Or are they still... no, not really. Our older brother, the firstborn, like when we were growing up and we were turning into hippies, he was kind of turning into a cowboy. So, he's very blue collar and very competent heating and air conditioning technician, self-employed. But his politics are mainstream Democratic Party. So, our big argument was over Hillary Clinton, and he was insisting that we must support Hillary Clinton. I was insisting that no, not necessarily.
No, most of us, I would say, I honestly, it's like, well, how much of it is your parents' influence, and how much was it that your parents just had it right? I mean, that's really how I kind of view it, and I've never really. It all just made so much sense. The worldview that I got from them made so much sense that I mean, I still have it. It's like I still see things in roughly the same way.
Now, how did it come about that the ACLU heard about your situation there?
Well, we got a call from a guy named, what's his first name? Kunstler.
Oh, really? William Kunstler?
Yeah, William Kunstler called us right up, and he said he would be our lawyer, pro bono, because he thought we had a First Amendment case. And so my parents asked around to the people they knew, who is William Kunstler? And they said, no, don't use him. He's too radical. So the Iowa Civil Liberties Union had a woman, Louise Noun, and she had inherited a fortune, so she was a philanthropist, but with a very strong civil libertarian bent. So she had been a patroness of the Iowa Civil Liberties Union for a long time, and they offered to handle our legal expenses, and they had a young lawyer, a 29-year-old lawyer, Dan Johnston, who took our case pro bono, and so that's how the ACLU became involved. And later, actually, my mother in St. Louis, when they had moved by then from Des Moines to St. Louis, our mother was involved in a lead paint coalition against landlords that weren't dealing with the lead paint issue, and the kids were eating the paint chips and getting health damage from that. So she was a social activist about that at that time, and she actually worked with William Kunstler again, or for the first time actually, but they met again. But anyway, no, that's how the ICLU and then the ACLU became involved in the case.
Yeah, I met Kunstler a few times because, like I said, I'm from New York, and I was with the Yippies in New York, Youth International Party, and he was the Yippie lawyer for the Yippies down there.
Well, now since you brought it up, I was at a rally during the Chicago 7 or 8 trial.
Okay.
And Abby Hoffman had come down to St. Louis. Now, my mother had worked with Abby Hoffman to help organize one of the national demonstrations in Washington. So after I was way at the back of this thing, we got there late, and Abby Hoffman was giving a talk telling the whole huge crowd about the trial up in Chicago. And afterward, my mom kind of took my sleeve and she dragged me through the crowd, and she's saying, Abby, I want you to meet my son, So anyway, I got up and shook his big warm hand, a big warm-hearted guy, and he's sitting there he's got a dirty red T-shirt on, and it's up above his belly, and he's scratching his belly, talking to me, but I really became aware of what it's like to have such a focus on social change that he and Jerry Rubin and that whole bunch did way back then. They really thought that it was worthwhile to make a full commitment, and so with the Yippie and all of that, I was my heart was there.
For students today in school, what are their rights of free speech?
Well, the main right that you have is to express your opinion, as long as it's not explicitly promoting drug use that's illegal, which is the Morse v. Frederick or the Bonk Hits for Jesus case. And then it cannot use sexual innuendo in the language. That's the Bethel v. Fraser case. And it also cannot be under the imprimatur of the school. So if it's a school-sponsored event or publication, then they can control the content. But other than that, if you are expressing your opinion in a non-disruptive way to the educational environment, then you have your full First Amendment right to do that.
So what would you recommend a student do then if they want to express their opinions and they're doing it in a non-disruptive way, has nothing to do with drugs? It's not a school-sponsored event, and they followed all the Tinker standard, right, they call it, right? They followed all the Tinker standard, but still they're being denied their First Amendment right. What should they do?
Well, contact the ACLU is always a good first step. They're funded to some degree, and they have the resources to deal with it. A lot of times, all they have to do is make a phone call to the school administration and explain what the real deal is, because the law is pretty clear on that. If in the decision, the Justice Abe Fortas wrote that there needs to be a material and substantial disruption to the educational environment before the school authorities can clamp down on it. And he says in so many words basically that a little bit of disruption has to be tolerated, because that's the way our society is, and that's the way a democracy works. And so if you have students that have come up with a non-disruptive way to just let their opinion be known, then there's really you've got the right to do that is pretty well established. Even conservative justices like Samuel Alito is very clear on that the Supreme Court has said a number of times, really, not just in our case, in the cases that are quoted by our case, the Supreme Court has pointed out over and over again that we are not a totalitarian society, and the schools can't be what they call enclaves of totalitarianism. So once that's explained to school administrations, often they come around, and it never gets to a court.
So they should complain to the principal or to the school district, the school board? Well,
basically what you want to do is let the school know that you know what your rights are. And let them contact their lawyer or whatever and have it explained to them if they really don't understand. But it's very clearly established. This is not one of those murky areas. If the students are not disruptive to the educational environment, then there's nothing the administration can legally do. They can misbehave. You can have misbehavior at any point, but once a lawyer has explained it, even their own lawyer, and that really happens.
And so the fact that the students are underage, they have just as much rights, free speech rights as an adult.
Absolutely, with the proviso that there is compulsory education,
right.
And so the students that are in school are not allowed to disrupt what they call the educational environment. So.
Now, what about walkouts? You see all these walkouts now. They're over the gun situation, school shootings. What a different world. What is that covered?
No. In fact, that would be the school board would use our case probably to argue their side, because our case establishes the right to express your opinion in a way that doesn't disrupt the educational environment. And it's the special circumstances of the school the walkout is disruptive to the educational environment. So the walkout, I wouldn't say don't do it. Don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying don't do it, but be prepared to that if the administration of your school is really being, okay, insert your ugly word here, okay, if they are really can't understand why students could be especially concerned about this sort of thing and the gun violence, especially down where you are, where you just had that horrific event. I mean, if the administrator, I saw an administrator in Texas had said that he was going to suspend students who walked out. But, I mean, all administrators are not nasty people. And some of them just, are unenlightened. I'll give them that. He might be a nice guy that just hasn't quite got it yet. That everything is not always about following those old rules. Sometimes new things happen, and you kind of have to make exceptions. And when you have a whole bunch of school kids getting killed, that's worth an exception. And there are a lot of school administrators that are going with that and are going to be with their kids, and they're going to walk to the state legislature or whatever it is.
Yeah, my daughter is in the middle right now of negotiating with the principal about a walkout that they're planning. Now, is there a website or something they can point to? Wikipedia? Would they look up a Tinker standard and show them that?
If you, well, for instance, on my own website of all of these thousands of news feeds, I do have one on Tinker v. Des Moines. So, if you go, there's a shortcut to it. For your listeners, if they go to schema-root.org/tinker, that's schema-root.org/tinker, all lowercase, that would get you to my page, and on that page I've got all of the resources that I would normally send to high school students and so on that are doing projects about the case. So it's kind of a collection point. I guess I have some dead links that I need to deal with there, but most of them are good. And it also has a current news feed. And so from that news feed, there are stories that refer to the case basically nearly every day. And in those stories, you'll have different reporters, or sometimes the ACLU, or the Student Press Law Center, or somebody else will be explaining something. And so you can get the essence of the case actually just by reading the news feed. But you can read the case, the decision directly. The Wikipedia article is a good article, and so you can learn a lot from there. And the basic principle of the Tinker standard, I think, is explained in the Wikipedia article.
Well, let me ask you this. Recently we had Colin Kaepernick, the football player. First he wasn't standing for the national anthem, now he's taking a knee because he was protesting unarmed civilians being shot down by police. And this, for a while there, it had branched out to high school students were doing the same thing at their sporting events. And is that covered under the Tinker standard?
Yes, it is. It certainly is. And if it's unclear, I'm not. Okay, it's different. It's different for schools, for athletes at a school-sponsored athletic event. I think they are covered. If for a non-football player, I don't know. If you're just, I'm pretty sure that it would be covered. I certainly hope so. I mean, next to having us doing the stiff arm salute, the West Virginia versus Barnett, 1943, is where that you have Jehovah's Witnesses not wanting to salute the flag. And the court, during the middle of the World War II, said they don't have to salute the flag because we're not the Nazis. And, they put it in formal language, but that's what they were saying. And that's the general principle, really. And it comes up when you're wondering, is it okay or is it not okay? Is it okay? I was at a school in Chicago, kind of a big assembly, and the principal, as part of his introduction to me, I was the speaker, he demonstrated gang symbol prohibitions, various symbols that you are not allowed to use in school. And it was pretty complex, and he went on for, a couple of minutes, one sign after another that these are not permitted. And by the time he was done, you're thinking, wow, it's like, how do you be free when you have to go through a whole catalog of things that aren't permitted? Maybe it's just easier to assume that nothing is permitted, and I'll go sit in a corner and read a book or something. And I think it's really important that we, freedom implies that we should be able to figure it out ourselves. Is it right or wrong what we're doing? Are we really offending against some principle here? Are we offending someone else's right by doing this? Are we damaging, harming? Is there anything? We should be able to figure it out. And if somebody is taking a knee and the next person says, no, you can't do that, you wonder, can't you figure that out? It's like, my view is that we need to learn to figure it out on our own, somewhat, and not be led around by like a bull with a nose ring. It's like we should be able to have some kind of a moral, ethical perspective and some sense of what the general rule is here. Don't hurt other people, and so on.
Yeah, you would think so. You would think so, It sounds so simple. We could go on about that forever, Even, I don't even want to get into it, but what about in a school, you can't wear gang jackets, right? Or gang signs or gang colors. That's prohibited, isn't it?
Yeah, they can prohibit that.
How can they? Because isn't that freedom of speech too as well?
Well, because freedom of speech is like, there's different kinds of speech. And just to set, extremes, you can't say, you can't shout fire in a crowded theater. So that establishes the principle that all speech is not necessarily protected. And you can't go into a bank and say your money or your life and claim that that's the speech there is instrumental. It's something else. Now the gang, what's a gang? Is a gang necessarily a group? Maybe not, but maybe so. And I don't know. I'm not trying to say what should be really, but it's more trying to understand how people are afraid of certain things. In terms of gang colors, it's going to come up more likely, like gang colors do come up in cities especially, but the Confederate flag or the swastika, something. And I think what it's going to come to is that they're going to, like the hate speech, the whole hate speech thing. It's like there's a borderline where expressing an idea, actually just in a kind of a non-threatening way, to express an idea and say, even an abhorrent idea, even a really horrible idea, but if you can kind of say it in a neutral tone and it's not taken a direct threat or something like that. But when you go into hate speech and you start shouting names at each other and so on, it's kind of coming closer to assault. And especially in a school environment, you can't do that. Like, in a sense, like, okay, 50 years ago we did this black armband thing, and it still stands. And partly that's because of the non-disruptive nature, and partly it's because there was no question that it was what they call pure speech. It was an idea that we. And so those are going to be more protected. When it veers off into disruptive, assaultive speech, then I think there starts. I mean, first obligation of human being is to be a decent person. I really think, and a lot of hate speech should be filtered out a little bit before it actually occurs. That's in a better world, I guess.
Yeah, but we have to allow it, because otherwise, we have to allow unpopular speech, because in 1965 or 1955, it was popular not to allow those blacks to swim in the swimming pool. You know,
no, you're stating one of the primary principles of free speech. It's like free speech is when you have free speech for the idea that you hate.
Right.
That's free speech. No, that's totally true. That's totally true. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about speech that becomes like an assault,
right.
or when you're inciting that kind of speech. It's like if you start shouting kill and then fill in the blank, kill some minority, kill, or or maybe not the minority. But if you start exhorting people to do violent things, it becomes more than just the expression of an idea. It becomes an attack. And the law, somebody said that the Constitution is not a suicide pact. Well, written law itself is not a suicide pact. And there are first principles, I would say, regarding your right to defend yourself, so on. And we're better off, the free speech advocates are really better off overall if we just avoid this is my view, if we can avoid the fine distinctions a little bit and kind of back away from the edge of the cliff, and then use our speech to talk about what we really think is important. And not to be testing the limit to see where the limit is, but do the right thing, and then defend your right to do the right thing. Be clear on what you're thinking and what you want to do. And then once you're clear that it's right for you to do it. And the law may or may not agree with you, but that shouldn't affect too much whether you decide to do it or not.
John Tucker, we're out of time. How can people find you? And again, tell them about your website there.
Well, that's probably the best way. If they go to that homepage on schema-root.org, and there's a contact us link, and that's me. It's editor@schema-root.org is my email address, and I welcome email from anyone. Even if you hate what I said, just tell me that. And if you're reasonable, I'll discuss it with you. Ed, thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay, then we had John Tinker, who was the guy behind. This is the guy that went to the Supreme Court and got free speech for our kids in school. It's called the Tinker Standard. And you could find him. What is this website here? You couldn't hear him at all there. That music was coming up. The audio on that thing was horrible. I don't know what we're going to do. Good old John Tinker. Schema-root.org. And that's spelled SCHEMA-root.org. And this has all kinds of stuff and all kinds of links to different kinds of news, RSS feeds, I suppose it is. And he's got a radio station down in Missouri and a national hero that put his butt on the line, went all the way to the Supreme Court and stood up for his principles there. And it is 50 years later. And we have him to thank for this kind of stuff. I like to bring in that kind of stuff here.